moment to set up her equipment.
Thank you, fellow Toastmasters. It's really great to be here today, and I think that you will enjoy the topic. How many people have a photography hobby or enjoy photography as a hobby? How many people have a single lens reflex camera, a nicer SLR camera? One person. How many people have used an SLR camera before? They're nice, right? And so the holidays are a great time. I know for us, we travel every year for 2 days to Texas, to the great state of Texas, to see our family. Sometimes we see family that we haven't seen for 3 or 4 years. Sometimes it's just an annual reunion with the family members. So we always try to capture that perfect holiday moment, and many times you want to have those pictures to hang on your wall or maybe use them for a gift for the next year. So just for the next few minutes, I'd like to talk to you just for a few tips on how to make those photos a little nicer so that you don't have something like this. Somebody's got their head in the way, the shot's not composed well. And so taking pictures can be a lot of fun. It also helps you get a little more comfortable in the room. And so we want to have a photo like something more memorable, and then maybe next year you'll put on a calendar or give it away to your family members. And so like the next few minutes I'm going to talk to you first, we'll go over the body of the camera. So we'll focus mainly on the SLR camera. So this is my SLR camera. It's not the nicest Canon Rebel. There's Canon, Nikon, Sony, many different brands that are nicer. In the Army, we're using a Nikon D300, which is a nicer model. And so when you're shopping for your SLR camera, what you want to look at is how easy you can, especially because it can be a couple $1,000 investment. This one was about $500, so it's still a significant investment. You want to be able to easily manipulate your focus. You want to be able to move your settings around, to even just take a picture. Sometimes some cameras you hold the button halfway down to focus. Different things, so you want to be able, it's comfortable, it's not too heavy. I know in the Army, we have a heavier, nicer camera. However, the problem is when you're walking on long missions and you're trying to carry heavy equipment, your arms tend to get shaky, and then your photos are not as well, you're not taking the time to compose it. So you want to have something that's compatible with moving around. Now I know many of us want to take our holiday photos. This camera, and then back in the old days we used to use this camera, right? Because they're so convenient to carry around and quickly snap your picture. However, all camera operating systems have about the same type of system. They have exposure and you have your lenses. And so the most popular lenses that we usually look at are the wide-angle lens. How many people have used the wide-angle lens? So wide-angle lenses are great for your group photos, for your family photos. However, people don't know that they're great too if you're stuck in a little small holiday party and you want to take a picture of some of your friends or your family. This is a great lens to turn around and take the picture without having to like step back and bring everybody in together and have people stack up on top of each other. This lens usually is about 18 millimeters to 35 millimeters. That's your wide-angle or macro lens. This is your standard lens. Back in the day, the standard lens was 35 millimeters, and they can go up to about 70 millimeters. This one is the 70s. Nowadays, it's about 50 millimeters. The standard lenses are good for, like for me, if I'm going to go hiking or I'm going to go to Disney World, and I don't want to carry a big old camera bag into the park. I just take one lens, and this lens allows me to take a little bit of a long, wide angle or wider photo, and I can also zoom in a bit too. The most popular lenses are the telephoto lens. It's a sexy lens that everybody likes because it can shoot up to 300 millimeters. You see the guys out on the NFL games with their big telephoto lens because they can get those really intense shots showing emotion and action. So that's the great thing with the telephoto lens. So next we'll talk about exposure. So exposure can be very confusing. When I first joined the Army, we had a test on exposure, and I actually had to take that test 3 times to really understand the f-stops and the shutter speeds and the apertures. So here's a little chart, and I'll be happy to share with anybody that's interested. A lot of us just go ahead and put our setting on auto, and then we just take pictures the rest of the time and don't worry about what the light settings are. But if you really want that memorable picture, you want to know a little bit about how to play with it. And so we'll start with your ISO. So before, remember we saw by film. That's the ISO is the sensitivity of your film. The typical ISO for going outside on a day like today, you want to shoot at about 200 ISO, 250. But if you're going, if you want to get your evening Christmas lights, or maybe you're in your holiday party in a darker room, you want to have a higher level ISO. It's 1600, 800, somewhere around there. The problem is the higher the ISO, the thinner the film is, or here, the more potential your picture is to be a little more grainy, and we call it pixelated now. It's not as rich, the quality's not as good, so just be cognizant of that. Now, along with it's called an exposure triangle, we have the aperture. The aperture is like your eye, whereas the lens is your actual eye looking at what your subject is. The aperture is your iris, where it opens and closes. Just imagine a little hole opening and closing in your camera. The lower your aperture is, the more light it's going to let in to take your picture. So back in the Civil War days, if you look at those old pictures where people sat in front of a camera for hours, it's because the camera was trying to take in all the light to make that image. And nowadays, of course, with the digital one, it's quick second. But when you're taking your holiday photos, like say you want to get your family outside today, you want to bring it up a little bit higher. You want to bring your aperture up about an 8, 5.6, maybe an 11. Make it a little higher because you're not going to take in as much light. Now, if you're doing it in front of your Christmas tree and the lights are dimmer, then you want to bring your aperture, you want to open it up a little bit more. Maybe make it 5.6 or 4 down to 2.8. Finally, on the third part of the triangle for exposure is shutter speed. Shutter speed is how fast, in the old days when we used film, it's how fast the camera is moving the film around, or how fast it's moving. The shutters are like a curtain. It's opening and closing. So for your holiday picture inside in the dark room, you want to open and close your curtain a little bit slower. So you want to have you want to make it like a lower shutter speed where the arrow's pointing at brighter. You want to make it, 10 seconds. You want to open and close it a lot slower. Like you see when you try to take your cell phone camera, sometimes it will take forever for the camera to click. Now what happens is, a lot of times we move around, we're trying to use a slower shutter speed, and it causes it to jiggle and become blurry. So one tip for that is to balance your camera or your cell phone, if you're going to use that, balance it on something. Set it down, find a place to prop it up, and that way it will hold still and take your picture still and take it in the lights. That's what your camera's doing if you don't have your SLR. And so next we'll just go over composition. The rule of thirds. How many people have heard of the rule of thirds? Wow, PhotoMaster. So when you're taking your picture, a lot of times we tend to put our family or our subject right smack in the center of your lens, or where you're going to focus. Like you take your cell phone, you're like that guy right there, and you put it right in the middle so you get, he's the high point. However, if you look at really professional photography, like in the back you see the picture with the rocks and the water, they're using the rule of thirds because the way your eye naturally draws towards images. Like here, she's taking up about a third of the picture. And so you really want your subject to take up a couple of points. You want to have either a third of space left or 2/3 of the space left. Just imagine that you have a tic-tac-toe board and you want to frame your subjects that way. And so now, with those few tips that I went over, we can take a holiday picture like this. So now you have a picture for next year. And so this concludes my speech. Thank you very much for listening, and Mr. Toastmaster, back to you.